Have you ever noticed how we look at a woman who lives alone? Not with curiosity, but with diagnosis, as if her solitude were a condition to be treated, not a conscious choice. Society still believes that a woman without a man is like a story without an ending, incomplete, waiting for resolution. But what if the opposite is true? What if a woman who chooses to live alone isn't incomplete, but in fact, complete within herself? When we encounter a woman living without a man by her side, we quickly create theories. She must be too picky. She probably has trauma. She's too focused on her career. She doesn't know how to be in a relationship. Rarely do we consider that she might be exactly where she wants to be. What many don't understand is that there's a difference between being alone and feeling lonely, between choosing your own company and suffering from the absence of others. The woman who lives without a man doesn't live in emptiness. She fully inhabits her own existence. This woman has taken a journey few dare to embark on. She has dived deep within herself. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, nights of tears, questions about her worth. But instead of seeking external validation, she turned inward. And there, in the silence of her own company, she began to hear a voice that had always been present but rarely listened to, her own. She learned that silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. On her path of self-discovery, she realized truths many spend their entire lives avoiding. She understood that relationships shouldn't be refugees, but encounters between whole people. She grasped that love shouldn't diminish her, but expand who she already is. She realized that her inner peace is worth more than any companionship that disturbs it. She accepted that she doesn't need someone else to validate or understand her. This woman isn't closed off to love. She has simply raised her standards beyond what society deems acceptable. She doesn't want just any relationship. She wants one that honors who she has become. There's something deeply threatening about a woman who is self-sufficient. She challenges the narrative that women are naturally dependent, emotionally fragile, eternally waiting for a hero. She exposes the uncomfortable truth that many relationships are built on unresolved needs, not conscious choices. In a world where a woman's worth is still often measured by her ability to attract and keep a man or woman content in her own company is revolutionary. This woman has been in relationships before. She knows the difference between mere company and genuine presence. She's no longer willing to dim her light to avoid outshining others. She refuses to silence her ideas just to keep the peace. She won't tolerate behavior that diminishes her. She doesn't settle for less than emotional reciprocity. She won't compromise her integrity out of fear of loneliness. She has learned, often the hard way, that being with someone who doesn't truly see her is lonelier than being with herself. In the space of her solitude, this woman has built something precious, self-knowledge. She knows her boundaries and values. She knows what's negotiable and what's non-negotiable. She has cultivated deep relationships with friends, family, and her community. She has developed passions and interests that nourish her. She has created a life that isn't a waiting room for the real beginning when someone comes along. It's a full life with its own purpose and meaning. This woman hasn't discarded love. She has simply redefined what she accepts as love. She seeks a companion, not a savior. She wants partnership, not completion. She desires to grow with someone, not lose herself in them. She hopes for conscious presence, not just occupying space. And until she finds that, she prefers the silence of her own truth to the noise of relationships that pull her away from herself. Without intending to, this woman has become a mirror, and many don't like what they see reflected. She reveals that we can choose, that we can say no, that we can wait, that a woman's worth isn't determined by her relationship status but by her inner integrity. Her journey didn't begin with grand declarations. It started with small refusals, moments when she said no where she once would have said yes just to please, times when she chose to stay home reading a book instead of going out with someone who didn't inspire her, times when she ended a relationship that seemed good enough but didn't help her grow. With each choice, with each boundary set, something within her grew stronger. A voice that once whispered now spoke clearly, and that voice said, You deserve more than emotional crumbs. Many mistake this clarity for coldness. They see her selectivity as arrogance. They interpret her peace as detachment. But what they don't understand is that this woman hasn't turned away from love. She has simply moved closer to an ancient, but often forgotten truth, that true love doesn't diminish, it expands. Don't think this woman doesn't have moments of weakness, that she doesn't feel the weight of loneliness on certain nights, that she doesn't question her choices when she sees others forming families or celebrating anniversaries. She feels too. She doubts too. She fears too. The difference is she has learned to embrace these feelings without letting them define her. She has learned that uncertainty is part of the path for anyone who dares to live by their own truth. She understands that fear isn't a sign to retreat, but an invitation to grow. That doubt isn't weakness, but honesty with herself. On the darkest nights, when silence feels heaviest, she doesn't seek escape. She sits with her solitude, talks to it, asks what it has come to teach her, and in this inner dialogue she discovers that even the hardest moments hold seeds of wisdom. Over the years, this woman notices a subtle but fundamental shift. What was once a defensive stance, "I won't accept less than I deserve," becomes a positive affirmation. "I know exactly what I want." Her solitude is no longer a waiting room, but a carefully tended garden. A place where she blooms at her own pace, in her own time. She realizes she isn't waiting for the right man. She's living fully, and it's this very fullness that will allow her to recognize true connection if and when it appears. Time has taught her that healthy relationships don't arise from need, but from abundance. Not from lack, but from wholeness. Still, single, aren't you afraid of growing old alone? You're so beautiful, smart, interesting. How have you not found someone? These questions follow her at family gatherings, reunions with old friends, casual conversations. At first, they made her doubt. Now they only make her smile, because she understands something her questioners haven't yet grasped. That being in a relationship isn't a guarantee of true companionship, just as being alone doesn't mean being incomplete. She sees couples who barely speak, sharing the same space but inhabiting different worlds. She observes relationships sustained by fear, convenience, or inertia. And silently, she gives thanks for having had the courage to choose a different path. Living on her own terms comes with costs. This woman knows them well. There's the social cost, the pitying looks, the veiled comments, the subtle exclusion from couples' events, the emotional cost, the moments of doubt, the nights of solitude, the challenge of building intimacy in a world structured for romantic partnerships, the practical cost, facing daily demands alone, without someone to share responsibilities and expenses. But she has discovered that freedom is never free, that authenticity always requires courage, that living by your inner truth sometimes means walking against the current, and she chooses to pay these prices, not out of stubbornness or pride, but out of loyalty to her own soul. There's a persistent myth about women who choose to live without men, that they reject connection, intimacy, love. Nothing could be further from the truth. This woman doesn't want less love. She wants more, a love so deep, so true, so transformative, that she prefers absence to its imitation. She doesn't reject vulnerability. She embraces it so fully that she refuses to confuse it with dependence. She hasn't discarded companionship. She has simply stopped seeing it as a necessity and started seeing it as a conscious choice, made from abundance, not lack. What this woman truly desires is a connection that respects her wholeness, a relationship where two complete people choose to walk side by side, not because they need each other to survive, but because together they can create something greater than they would apart. Those who think this woman lives in isolation are mistaken. Her existence isn't lonely or empty. In truth, she cultivates deep, meaningful relationships with friends who have become family, with relatives who see her for who she truly is, with her community, neighbors, colleagues. She invests time and energy in connections that nourish her, that respect her boundaries, that celebrate her autonomy. And in these relationships, she finds something many couples search for in vain: true intimacy, the ability to be seen, heard, and accepted in her entirety. without having to shrink or adapt to fit others' expectations. There's a crucial difference between loneliness and solitude. The first is a state of lack. The second, a state of presence. This woman cultivates solitude as sacred space, an inner temple where she meets herself without distraction or interference. In this space, she isn't running from the world. She's diving deeper into it, connecting, with a wisdom that reveals itself only in silence. Solitude has become her spiritual practice, her refuge, her source of renewal. And it was precisely in this seemingly empty space that she felt more fulfilled than she ever had in relationships that left her emotionally starved. For this woman, love is no longer something she seeks outside herself. It has become a quality she cultivates within, one that naturally overflows into her relationships. She has realized that true love isn't a transaction where you give to get. It isn't a contract. It isn't a guarantee against the existential loneliness we all carry as human beings. Love has become, for her, a way of being present, a quality of attention, a way of moving through the world that doesn't depend on having a romantic partner. She loves her friends, her family, her community. She loves her work, her passions, her causes. She loves nature, art, beauty, wherever she finds it. And above all, she has learned to love herself, not with the narcissistic love that needs external mirrors to confirm it, but with the mature love that embraces both her light and her shadows. Our culture is saturated with messages telling us we're incomplete without a romantic partner, that there's a missing piece inside us that only another person can fill. This woman has questioned this myth, examined it in the light of her own experience, and recognized it for what it truly is. Narrative that keeps us searching outside ourselves for the wholeness that's already within. She has discovered that completeness isn't something to be found or achieved. It's a state of being that arises when we stop dividing ourselves, when we integrate all parts of who we are, even those society taught us to reject. And it was precisely in this integration, this deep self-acceptance, that she found the peace so many seek in relationships. Perhaps the deepest revolution this woman represents isn't external but internal, not in the social structures she challenges, but in the inner freedom she has. One, she no longer defines herself by absence of a man, a relationship, a traditional family. She now defines herself by presence of her conscious choices, her integrity, her courage to live by her own truth. This is a quiet revolution, without manifestos or barricades, a revolution that happens in the hearts and minds of women who one by one are rediscovering their intrinsic worth, independent of relationship status. It's a revolution that doesn't reject men, but rejects the idea that a woman needs a man to be complete, valid, or worthy. What this woman is creating, often without realizing it, is a new paradigm of relationship, a model based not on need or dependence, but on conscious choice and shared autonomy. This paradigm doesn't see relationships as solutions to inner emptiness or refuges from loneliness. It sees them as shared journeys between two whole people, each responsible for their own happiness and growth. In this new model, a relationship isn't a final destination, but a context for mutual evolution, not an end in itself, but an expression of shared values and compatible worldviews. And perhaps, most importantly, this paradigm recognizes that there are many valid forms of human connection, and that romantic partnership is just one of them, not necessarily superior or more desirable than others. The woman who lives without a man isn't just making a personal choice. She's extending a silent invitation to all of us. An invitation to question our assumptions about what makes a life full and meaningful. An invitation to examine our fears of being alone and what they reveal about our relationship with ourselves. An invitation to consider whether we're in relationships by conscious choice or by conformity to external expectations. This isn't an invitation to reject relationships, but to transform our understanding of them, to see them not as needs but as possibilities, not as remedies for our inadequacy, but as expressions of our wholeness. What many don't realize is that this woman isn't closed off to deep connections. On the contrary, She's more open to them than ever. But she has learned to tell the difference between true connection and emotional dependency, between authentic intimacy and fusion that erases personal boundaries. She seeks a connection that honors her individuality, rather than diluting it, a bond that celebrates her strength rather than feeding on her vulnerability. And she has discovered that such connections are rare, that they demand from both parties a level of emotional maturity, self-awareness and integrity that few have cultivated. So she waits, not with impatience or desperation, but with the serenity of one who trusts timing and her own discernment. This isn't a story with a definitive ending. It doesn't conclude with the woman finding the right man to rescue her from loneliness. Nor does it end with her permanently rejecting any possibility of romantic partnership. It's an ongoing journey of self-discovery, an ever-evolving process of aligning more deeply with her inner truth. Perhaps tomorrow she'll meet someone who resonates with her essence, someone who sees her independence not as a threat, but as something to celebrate, someone who has done their own inner work and is ready for a connection between equals. Or perhaps she'll continue her path alone, uncovering new layers of meaning and purpose that transcend our cultural obsession with romantic relationships. Either way, she won't be defined by the presence or absence of a man in her life, but by the presence she cultivates within herself. There are profound lessons we can all learn from the woman who chooses to live without a man. Lessons about emotional autonomy and the ability to be at peace in our own company. Lessons about the value of setting high standards for those we allow into our intimate lives. Lessons about the courage to follow our own truth, even when it goes against social expectations. Lessons about the difference between true love and dependency disguised as love. These are valuable lessons not just for single women, but for all of us, regardless of gender or relationship status. Because in the end, the fundamental question this woman invites us to contemplate isn't how to find a partner, but how to live an authentic life aligned with our deepest essence. If you're a woman living without a man, know that your journey is valid and meaningful, that your choice not to settle for less than you deserve is an act of courage and self-respect. If you're in a relationship, ask yourself, am I here by conscious choice or out of fear of loneliness? Does this relationship expand me or diminish me? Am I fully present or just playing a role? And wherever you are on this spectrum, remember, your wholeness is already within you. It's not something to be sought in another person, but a truth to be rediscovered in the silence of your own heart. The untold truth about women who live without men isn't a story of lack or absence. It's a story of full presence, of courage, of integrity. It's the story of women who dared to ask, what if the life I'm meant to live is bigger, deeper, and more authentic than what I've been told I should want? And who, in seeking answers to this question, discovered a liberating truth, that the most important love they'll ever find is the love they cultivate for themselves. At the beginning of this journey, we talked about how society sees women who live without men as incomplete stories, as narratives waiting for resolution. Now, we see clearly the flaw in this perspective, because the woman who has chosen herself isn't incomplete. She's in a constant process of integration, of gathering all the parts of herself that were fragmented by external expectations, cultural conditioning, emotional wounds. She isn't waiting for someone to complete her. She's becoming more complete with each day, each conscious choice, each act of self-honesty. And perhaps this is the secret few understand, that the deepest, most transformative relationships don't happen when we seek someone to fill our voids, but when we become so full that we naturally overflow toward another. When two complete human beings choose to share their journeys, not out of need or lack, but from mutual recognition of their essential truths. Until then, this woman will continue on her path, not as an unfinished story, but as a circle complete in itself, perfect in its own wholeness. And this, perhaps, is the most revolutionary act a woman can perform in a world that still tries to define her worth by her ability to attract and keep a man to choose herself, to love herself, to be enough for herself, not out of pride or stubbornness, but out of deep wisdom, a wisdom that recognizes that true relationship begins with the relationship we have with ourselves, a wisdom that understands authentic love can only flourish between people who don't use each other to fill their voids, but to celebrate their fullness. This is the untold truth about women who live without men. It's not a story of lack, but of abundance, not of passive waiting, but of active choice, not of imposed loneliness, but of solitude cultivated with intention and purpose. And this truth, once recognized, has the power to transform not only these women's lives, but our entire understanding of what it means to love and be loved, of what it means to be in relationship with others and, first and foremost, with ourselves. Because in the end, the woman who has learned to live without a man isn't rejecting love. She's honoring it in its purest, highest form. She's recognizing that true love can never arise from need, only from freedom, never from incompleteness, only from shared wholeness. And this, perhaps, is the most valuable gift she offers the world, the living example of a new way to love, a love that begins within and overflows outward, a love that doesn't bind but liberates, a love that doesn't diminish but expands, a love that doesn't need another to exist, but that, when it finds genuine resonance, creates something greater than the sum of its parts, something deeply transformative, something truly sacred.